The big debate, the big news outside of the actual news has been this battle over Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes. Mediaite published this story a week ago, Anti-Semitism's Insidious Climb Back Through the Overton Window, with Zoran Mamdani saying NYPD's boots are laced by the IDF, Nick Fuentes, not a fan of Israel, nor Tucker Carlson. This seems to be one of the most important things for people who are, I don't know what the right way to describe them is, terminally politically online. When you go to Virginia and you wonder why it is Jay Jones won, well, as I mentioned, I've got a segment coming out a little bit later talking about how women love bad boys who threaten to murder people. That's true. I think for the most part in Virginia, you can see that, Trump took away the jobs of a lot of the bureaucratic state who lives in Virginia, and they ain't too happy about it. Plus, the government is shut down. So domestic issues tend to be the dominant issues. However, that being said, I do believe we are seeing the ascendancy of Nick Fuentes. And I didn't really think that so much maybe a year or so ago. But there's a great exchange between Ted Cruz and Brett Cooper, which I think kind of exemplifies the point. Now, I certainly think Nick Fuentes has been, let's start by saying wrong on a lot of issues, vitriolic, and I think what makes it, what harms his position so much is the acidic, toxic nature of how he presents information. By all means, you can argue that you like the guy or whatever you think about him, but he is vitriolic. He comes off as sharp, aggressive, angry, needling. That's the point as to why I believe he is, at this point, ascendant. We got AmericanFinancing.net. Check out AmericanFinancing.net/Tim. If you've been living on credit cards just to cover your groceries, gas bills, you know those interest rates are brutal. Why keep paying 20% or more to the banks when you could call our friends over at American Financing? They got mortgage rates in the fives, and they are showing people every day how to keep more of your hard-earned money in your pocket and out of the hands of credit card companies. Right now, American Financing is helping homeowners save an average of $800 a month by using their home's equity to wipe out high-interest debt with no upfront fees, no obligation, and just a 10-minute call to a salary-based mortgage consultant. And here's the kicker. If you start today, you could delay 2 mortgage payments, putting even more cash in your hands right away. Don't wait. Call American Financing now at 866-890-7811. That's 866-890-7811, or visit AmericanFinancing.net/Tim. Now, again, I don't agree with the guy on a lot of things. There's a lot of things I probably agree with him on. And I think as it pertains to domestic issues, you'd probably find most people are going to agree with Nick on a variety of issues, like securing our borders, not giving money to foreign governments, focusing on America first and foremost. And then he says things about being on Team Hitler, and a lot of people are like, bro, what are you doing? Like, even if you really thought that, why say it? You're just souring your position among the mainstream. It appears now that Nick is going on some kind of rehabilitation tour. Maybe he's realizing you shouldn't say those things that garner you nothing and only would end up being a detriment to you. They're bad positions. They're wrong positions. Hitler was a bad guy. He was a genocidal maniac. You can make a lot of arguments about saving the German economy. You can make arguments about France and the UK and the end of World War I. Make them all. But no one's going to, you're not, when you go carrying pictures of Chairman Mao, you ain't going to make it with anyone anyhow. That's the point, right? The dude did largely bad things. I have no problem saying, you take a look at Hitler, you take a look at Stalin and the communists, and listen, there are crazier dictators who murdered millions of people than Hitler did, but Hitler was particularly egregious in his scapegoating of particular groups. That strikes at the heart of why people really don't like the guy. Maybe that's an understatement, but he was not a good dude. Certainly history is written by the victors, but in this instance, the guy was clearly nuts. But that being said, I'm not here to entertain those views of Nick Fuentes, but to point out Nick is on the rise because people are tired of this. They're tired of people like Ted Cruz. Now, I'm not trying to be a dick to Ted. I try to be a bit academic in my insults depending on the individual and their level of vitriol. But let's start here with this video from Brett Cooper, which is getting a lot of attention.
You are so blinded by your ridiculous, insane hatred of Tucker Carlson that you cannot see how irresponsible and hypocritical you are being. I mean, these tweets from Ted Cruz, I'm going to read you next, are a great example of this. So just a month ago, he tweeted this. He said, "They don't kill you because you're a Nazi. They call you a Nazi so they can kill you. Political violence is a left-wing phenomenon. Enough is enough. We need to shut it down." And then in response to Fuentes and Tucker this week, he tweeted this. "Trump's bombing of the Ayatollah's nuclear facilities made the little Nazi mad. Good." So now you're turning around and you're calling somebody that you don't like a Nazi. You're doing this out of blind rage because you're so angry that the conservative base's attitudes are rapidly changing, that Nick Fuentes is getting national attention, and so you have turned around and in response, you are compromising your own values in anger, which is such a dangerous precedent to set. And unfortunately for you guys, yes, the attitudes are changing, so again, it makes sense why this group is incredibly frantic. You are so blinded by your ridiculous...
Okay, I just gotta say to Brett Cooper, I honestly, are you familiar with Nick Fuentes' content and the things he said in the past about Hitler, the story he told his parents? Now, to be fair, I don't watch a lot of Nick's content. Anytime I see one of these clips, I assume they're probably going to be out of context in some way, but the man certainly got a lot of clips praising Hitler. So Ted Cruz responds with this. "I don't know who this angry lady is, but she's missing a key distinction. Fuentes calls himself a Nazi. He has said that, well, Fuentes finds Hitler cool, agrees with him, says he's on Team Hitler. If you explicitly side with and advocate for Hitler, you're an actual effing Nazi." Oh, boy. Well, let me say this. Batya Ungar-Sargon made a great point that the issue of calling people Nazis is when they aren't, and they oppose fascism, and they don't like Hitler. Then you are incorrectly calling someone a Nazi. But Fuentes says he likes Hitler. And if that's the case, I kind of shrug at the notion that someone calls him a Nazi. It's like, I guess not literally neo-Nazi. I don't know, whatever you're going to call him. Groiper may be the term, but I'm not going to lose my mind over Ted Cruz calling Fuentes a Nazi. And I think Brett's kind of wrong on this one. But here's the point. While it may be fair to say if Fuentes wants to be vitriolic and support Hitler, people are going to call him a Nazi, and then we're like, well, I understand why. Ted Cruz and the Republicans have been so weak, demure. People are going to side with the actual Nazi. That's the point. Look, listen. You can make the arguments and draw your distinctions about whether Nick is or is not a Nazi, whatever. I don't care. I've heard what the guy says. I think those statements are wrong. I assume some of them are out of context. But Nick is who Nick is. He's vitriolic. He comes off as smug. But a lot of people like this. And this is the point. When you approach a young man and say, Ted Cruz will offer you mindless platitudes and do nothing, Nick Fuentes will scream, spit, and yowl and say things people dare not say, I know where young people are going. That's why Nick Fuentes is gaining popularity. When you look at these pro-Israel influencers, I want to... Why are they so bad at what they do? Again, I was talking to Gavin McInnes the other day. He said, maybe I'm one of these guys. I'm like, no, I think Gavin does a good job. Gavin has no problem sitting down with Nick Fuentes or anybody else for that matter and having a conversation on his support for Israel. That's great. You've got Batya Ungar-Sargon, who I talked with, and I said, you're also not doing this. You're doing a good job. You're like the explanation she gave as to why it's not the same to call Nick a Nazi versus Trump is that Nick has been explicitly pro-Hitler in many comments. So I think that's a fair assessment. You can disagree with it, but it's not irrational and coming from nowhere, like when some random leftist calls J.D. Vance a Nazi, and it's like, that's just fabricated nonsense. But here's what happens for the younger generation. Young men in particular are being told, you will not own property. You will not find a wife. You will have no legacy. Your country is gone. We gave it away. And Ted Cruz says, well, slow down there, Democrats. And young men are going, what? We just watched a communist win in New York. Nick Fuentes is saying a bit more than that. And so if you have a problem with the opinions of Nick Fuentes, the real issue is your spineless weakness. And again, I try to be nice. You know, Ted Cruz does what he does, but I find the Senate to be largely ineffective and a waste of time for the most part. So what's going to happen? Well, what I can say, young people, is I don't think Nick is going to lift you out of any of your troubles. I know young men who are fans of Nick Fuentes. I have defended and praised him on certain circumstances. I would prefer to have an actual conversation with the man over his views on Hitler, because I don't trust out of context clips for the most part. And that would be an interesting conversation. But he's made many points that resonate with young men, particularly young white men. There's a viral video that has tens of millions of views where Nick Fuentes says he doesn't want to live near black people. He explains it doesn't mean he has a problem with individual black people. And in the past, he's called racism low IQ. Interesting. What's his point? He's saying what all of these suburbanite white people pretend not to believe, but will say it privately. This is also why I think Jay Jones is a very serious threat. Jay Jones privately will say that he wants to murder conservatives, and publicly say, oh, I don't mean it. I have been. You know, I'm a liberal guy. I'm from Chicago. I do believe white people in these cities are racist. And maybe they kind of view things the way Nick Fuentes does. And I guess, you know what, coming from Chicago, probably I see what Nick sees. Nick lives in just slightly outside of Chicago. I guess people have doxed him already, and people generally have an idea of where he was staying, but I'm not going to play into that. Let me just say, Nick Fuentes lives only a few miles away from where I grew up. I know why he thinks the things that he does. Because what do you say to a young white kid in Chicago when you've got racially segregated neighborhoods, and it's segregated largely by choice, not completely, because blockbusting and redlining was a thing, but people choose to live near the same race. Where I grew up in Chicago on the southwest side near Vidham Park, Midway Airport, we had this thing where young black girls from across north of 47th, the LeClaire Courts, gang territory, largely black, would come to the side that was predominantly white and rob young girls, frisk them, steal their stuff, and the cops would do nothing about it because it'd be racist. And so we just had to live through that. Now, I don't blame individual black people because a community of people in gangs are attacking us. I don't blame the Jews because some Jews own businesses. There's a distinction that I think is important because no one should be judged based on the actions of other people who might look like them. It's a horrifying reality, and it pains me to think that because you've got a black community in Chicago robbing white people, that there's going to be a good dude who is black that gets discriminated against simply because other bad people look like him. It's stupid. Racism is dumb. There's certainly a component of shared traits among people based on perceived race and all of that stuff I get. Like, I went to Thailand and I was taller than everybody. That's a reality. But I am not going to judge an individual or even a family because I've had a bad experience with people who looked some way. I also don't think it's completely unfair if you live in an area like I did, if you were apprehensive, if you saw a large group of black people coming from that area, you'd be like, we get robbed by these people. And so that is it's unavoidable. What happens? Nick Fuentes says what everybody in Chicago says, and they don't want to admit it. These liberals will come out and be like, I don't support racism, but they won't tell you the truth about how they actually behave. A great example is that property values go down in black neighborhoods. When black people move into certain neighborhoods, property values go down. Privately, all of these white suburban liberals will tell you this, and Nick Fuentes knows it. So what happens? Young white guys in these areas, in these cities, see no future for themselves. They're not going to own property. They're not going to get married. And they hear all around them people talking about the bad neighborhoods and the correlation between bad neighborhoods and race, for whatever the reason may be. Then they get told criminals should be let out of jail. They get shown images where it's clearly not a white guy being labeled as a white guy in crime stats. And they're angry and saying, why are you lying to me about Trump, about the government, about immigration? Nick Fuentes comes along and says, I don't want to live near these people for these reasons. And they go, that's exactly what my neighbors were saying. But they don't say it publicly. See, Nick told the truth. Then Nick comes out and praises Hitler, and these people are like, maybe they're lying about him too. maybe if y'all would be honest on these issues, you might see young people changing their views on things and not supporting Hitler and Nazis. Now, I think Nick is moderating. Even he has said so. And maybe he's starting to realize you don't win friends with salad, as it were. There's nothing to be gained by supporting Hitler. Literally, it's 100 years ago. The guy was not a good dude and nobody likes him. There's no point in putting yourself in that box. Stupid. If you want to succeed politically and you actually want to bring about change, you're not going to make it with anyone anyhow, as the song goes. The point is this. Republicans are weak. They are ineffective. They win elections and do nothing. And what do people want? They want that anger. So they vote for Trump. On the younger side, they see Nick, who is vitriolic, but they like it. Finally, someone is angry and it's cathartic. What they need is someone who is willing to be tough and push back and not be a spineless loser. The Democrats have it. They're willing to kill. Crazy, right? On the right, they won't even use the power they have. Nobody should be killing anybody. Conservatives shouldn't be going and shooting up, and none of that should be happening. Democrats especially shouldn't be doing it. They're the ones who are. Republicans could at least use the power they have that they've won. Instead, they don't. So here's where we are. Don't be surprised when a larger and larger portion of young people start to follow those who are willing to be angry and say what people feel mustn't be said because they're tired of being lied to and they're tired of feckless leaders. I would prefer it if somebody else took the mantle, and it was not Nick Fuentes, but I'm warning the conservatives right now who keep trying to play this game. You suck at all of this. Let me tell you. The conservatives who try and play this stupid game of slow down their Democrats, and the conservatives who try to be desperately pro-Israel with the worst PR game I've ever seen. It's cringe. It is cringe. Man, is it miserable. But you know what? Who am I to talk? I ain't going to run for office. I'm not going to stand on the front lines. I'm just a guy who complains on the internet. So listen to me or don't. Whatever. We'll see. Lord have mercy. I'll leave it there. Smash the like button. Share the show with everyone you know. Stay tuned. We got more coming up for you. We'll see you all in the next segment.